Welcome to Laser Reviews. This is the second part of my 2024 retrospective. The first part I talked about what I did with my channel that year, some of the films I watched, some of the reviews I made. This video I will focus on all the videos I didn't cover on my channel, all the films I watched in 2024 but didn't review and don't plan to review. Of course, I'm not talking about every single film. I'll talk about the good ones that I think are worth highlighting and some of the really bad ones I watched as well that I think you should not watch. So warnings, more so than recommendations, I want to warn you about these movies. I have a lot of movies that I watched. I have a lot of films I want to cover. So you will not really see my face as I will need a list in front of me to read all of these up for you. So it's not movies that came out in 2024 necessarily, but just the films I watched in 2024 and enjoyed or hated. My commentary about each film I will mention in this video will be extremely brief. But if one piques your interest and you want to read more about or hear more about my thoughts about it before watching it, you can read the entries on my Letterboxd. I write down a review, long or short, of every single film I watch and is on my Letterboxd. They're not necessarily that well written. I tend not to proofread them or anything. It's more for me just to remember what I watched and to see what movies I want to recommend to other people or something, or what movies I might have forgot that are classics. I create lists and everything of films I have in there. So you can read those reviews if you want to hear more thoughts about these films, or if there's another film you're curious, maybe I watched it, you can read my thoughts about them on my Letterboxd as well. But I think that's all I want to say. Let's get started. So let's start with the good ones, or what I would call my recommendations. The first one is a bit of an odd choice, but I watched Forbidden World and I liked it a lot. It is an Alien ripoff with also elements from The Thing, made by the one and only, the king of B movies, Roger Corman. And I liked it. I don't think it's perfect. It has some bad elements. It is a weird, erotic, very horny Alien ripoff with a lot of other elements thrown into it. But I enjoyed it. I think it's quite cool and definitely one of the better Alien ripoffs I've seen. So I'll give it not a strong recommendation, but I'll give it a recommendation. The next recommendation is Get Duked. It's a funky, funny, high school, deadliest game satire thing, and I don't want to see more about it. It's good. Watch it. Then I watched Hot Shots Part 2, and I'm surprised I haven't seen this before. I've definitely seen the ending multiple times, and I've seen the first one a few times, but this is an amazing movie. I definitely think it's more funny than the first one. It is a Charlie Sheen Rambo ripoff with also, of course, parodying several other movies. One of those great satire films that's full of action, full of really, really stupid gags. Not everything holds up. It's a bit similar to Naked Gun and all those things, but it's really enjoyable. I liked it. If you liked that old school kind of comedy where you're okay with not every single joke landing, then this will be a very strong recommendation for you. Another great movie I watched was The Day of the Beast. It's a Spanish black comedy, mid-90s Christmas horror about a priest who has to do as many bad things as possible so he can meet the devil to stop the birth of the Antichrist. A very good film, not perfect by any means, but I enjoyed it a lot. It's really stupid, but in all the right ways. Strong recommendation, especially if you're into more heavy metal themed horror movies or movies in general, as this is one of them. A film I did watch that I thought about making a video on for a while is The Sitter. It's a good Jonah Hill babysitter flick that came out not long after Superbad, so around when he was in his comedy heyday. If you like Jonah Hill, if you like Sam Rockwell, it's definitely a movie for you. It's a high shenanigans urban comedy about this bad babysitter who has to babysit these asshole kids, and of course they learn to love each other and they develop from the experience. One of those movies. And then I finally watched Swingers. Of course, Swingers is not even really a cult classic, it's just a classic. It's a really great indie film, and I really loved seeing Vince Vaughn. A young Vince Vaughn. I mean, this is a really good movie, not just because of Vince Vaughn. It's a good movie. It's a slice of life. It is a really atmospheric. One of those movies where not that much happens, but just the movie happening itself is great. And if you haven't seen it, watch it. It is a classic for a reason. So on this list, I didn't put on any movies I tend to rewatch all the time, but I did put on some movies I hadn't seen in a very long time and just had a great experience with. One of them was True Romance. True Romance is such a good film. Of course, I'm not the first one saying it, but the casting is amazing. The characters are amazing. It's really funny. It has some really good action scenes. It just has some really good scenes overall. One of the most memorable scenes with Christopher Walken is in this film. I love it. It's great. I can only recommend it if you haven't seen it before. It's in that early mid-90s, a bit Tarantino-esque. It's a gritty LA film with a lot of bad things happening to also people who are not that great, but of course less bad than the real bad. A low-life story at its finest. Talking about low-lives, also watched in Bruges. This is a great British-Irish action comedy. I'm not even sure I heard about it before, which surprised me because this is also not really an indie or cult classic or anything. It's a movie that a lot of people know and that a lot of people love, and I can understand why. It's funny, it has good action scenes, but most of all, it's just, yeah, funny. It's a funny film. Funny action film. 2007 around that time. Watch it if you haven't seen it yet. Talking about funny films, I watched For Your Height Only. This is not a movie that is haha funny. It is a Filipino 70s James Bond ripoff starring the always wonderful Wang Wang. So you might have heard about this. I'm definitely not the first one talking about this film. It is good. It is enjoyable. People will recommend it for a reason. Go and watch it. Now, finally for a movie that I do think is more obscure. Vice Squad is a great early actions Skid Row thriller. It is about this violent pimp in Skid Row that the police is trying to track down and using the help of a grieving friend to do so. It's great. It doesn't really have a deep story. It has some good characters. It has a lot to like. It's not a wonderful movie, but it is a good movie. And I think if you haven't seen it and if you like your gritty, the Deuce-ish films with, you know, Taxi Driver, the kind of low-life pimp films. But of course, this is LA. It's not New York, but it is kind of the same thing. I like these movies. Midnight Cowboy, that kind of thing. This is one of them. Do watch it. Of course, it's not on the same level as the movies I just mentioned, but it is good. And for something entirely different, I watched The Castle. It is a quirky Australian comedy, but a social realist comedy in a way, about the little man's struggle against the system as this very simple family is trying to battle the system to preserve the rights to their own house, to their own castle. It is funny. I can understand why it's not for everyone, and I think the only word I can really use to describe this film is serenity. It has serenity.
How's the serenity?
I think he also just loved the word.
So much serenity.
A film that certainly doesn't have serenity is Black Swan. I hadn't really seen this film since it came out. Of course, people know it's a good movie, people know it's a great film. You don't really need me to say it, but in case you have missed it, in case you haven't watched it, even if this kind of psychological feminist drama, thriller, horror doesn't really sound like it's up your alley, it probably is because it's amazing. It's so well executed. It has, of course, a lot of good commentary about the whole rotten world these, performers in general are in, about all the intrigue, about how people mistreat each other, about all the competition. But more so, it's just a great film. It's terrifying, it's so well performed, so well filmed, the sound design, everything is good about this movie. It is a masterpiece. It is a movie I absolutely love. And I didn't even expect liking it as much as I did. So if you missed this one, do watch it. Another film that surprised me is Absolute Power. I do like Clint Eastwood's movies, of course not all of them, but this is another one that is directed by him and is starring him in the lead. And it is a good one. He's playing a master thief who witnesses the murder of a mistress of the president, who happens to be the wife of a very close member of the cabinet. And Clint Eastwood is therefore left with a moral dilemma if he should go to the police and try to have this exposed to the public so that justice can happen, or if he should keep his mouth shut to stay safe and also keep all the things he stole from this place. A good film. Again, not an amazing movie, but I enjoyed it quite a lot. Moving to possibly the oldest movie on this list, The Apartment from the early 60s. This is an interesting and funny movie about awful people and how to deal with them. And I don't want to say more about it. It's quite good, and it's not really a cult classic or anything, it's just a classic. Now for another movie I hadn't seen since I was a kid, Minority Report. I know people consider it as a masterpiece, as a classic, and it actually is. And if you haven't seen it yet, you should watch it. Another holiday film that I didn't watch during the holidays is The Holdovers. It's a great coming-of-age film, comedy, whatever you want to call it, about these few students who are left behind at a boarding school during Christmas, and they're stuck there with a teacher. And it's a teacher they don't like, but maybe they grow to like him. It's about getting older, having family, finding love, all the questions of life, chasing your dreams, all these things. Not just for the young, but also for the old. It's good, it's sweet, it's a very enjoyable movie. You don't need to wait for the next Christmas to watch it, but you can of course keep this as a Christmas pick. Another film that took me a bit by surprise, again because it's another movie I hadn't heard about, was 24-Hour Party People. It is a funny, well-executed biopic about the party scene and the music scene in Manchester and the broader UK in the late 70s, 80s and 90s. It's good. It's well acted, it's funny. It is very much an early 2000s movie in the editing, cinematography and everything, but I think it's quite good. And especially if you like bands like Joy Division or are interested in the rave scene, this is a great film to watch. A film that's great to watch for all the wrong reasons is Suburban Sasquatch. It is one of the worst films I've ever seen, but it's hilarious. It's one of the worst best movies out there, and I can strongly recommend it. Of course, there are other channels that have covered this film and have made good reviews of it, so I'm not going to do that myself. Of course, Red Letter Media made one. I also think that Jason Brandt made a video of it, and yeah, it's good. It has this reputation for a reason. You should watch it if you like bad movies. A movie that certainly isn't bad is 1981's Southern Comfort, starring Powers Booth, where soldiers from a Louisiana Redneck National Guard detachment are sent into the bayou on a training mission, and after pissing up some Cajuns, find themselves in their very own little Vietnam in America. Great film. I enjoyed it. It's not a war movie, it is more of a thriller. A very different film I watched this year that was great is About a Boy. I watched it as a kid and couldn't care less for Hugh Grant, but watching this as an adult with a different perspective and everything, I can say that Hugh Grant is absolutely amazing in this film. He's hilarious, and so is the rest of the cast. It's a good movie about this late 30s playboy who realizes he can easily date mothers because they're easy to break up with, until it ends up biting him in the ass. It's a romantic comedy, but it's a really good romantic comedy. And I don't like romantic comedies, so if you don't like romantic comedies, maybe even then give it a chance. Something that certainly isn't a romantic comedy is Boogie Nights. Or, well, you could call it a romantic comedy, but a different kind of romance. It is a film that's largely styled on the life of John Holmes, and it depicts the porn industry in the 70s and 80s in LA. It is very good, very well acted, hilarious. It has a formidable cast. Seymour Hoffman is great in it. Burt Reynolds in one of his best roles. It's overall just a good movie. You should watch it. Another great movie that I hadn't watched for some reason is Mean Streets, a very early Scorsese film that is absolutely brilliant. It is another movie about low-life thugs in New York in the early 70s and about a night in their lives. Not that much else to say, but it's really good if you like your gangster flicks, if you like your crime flicks. This is less so gangster and crime than his later movies, but it does star a lot of the people who would appear in his later films. A movie that's quite different is When Evil Lurks. When Evil Lurks is a terrifying, odd, gory Argentinian horror film set in a slightly alternate universe. It's a movie that doesn't tell you much, but it's also a movie where you don't need to understand much. All you need to understand is that this universe is awful, it's scary, and disgusting things happen, and you're just basically doomed. I'm not even sure what to say about this. It's a possession, horror, pseudo-zombie, pseudo-satanic, weird movie that is just great. But you need to stomach awful things. A movie that it does remind me a bit of is The Sadness in terms of its sadism. Sadness is just more gross. It's more sadistic in some ways than this film is. This one is just evil. And yeah, When Evil Lurks, it's an evil movie. And if you haven't seen it, it's great. But yes, it's for the more seasoned horror fans. A movie that you hadn't expected to be on this list is The Longest Day, a very long World War II movie from the early 60s that is about D-Day. It's The Longest Day. It's D-Day. It has a really, really big, great cast, as many of these old war movies do. It has a great budget. It has some great scenes. It's just overall a great film, at least if you like your old war movies. And talking about old war movies, we have a movie that came out around 10 years later, Kelly's Heroes. Another great Clint Eastwood movie. This is absolutely one of the best war movies I've ever seen. It is hilarious, it is great, it has good action, it has a great plot. It's about this renegade group of soldiers who decide to go on a treasure hunt, and it doesn't just have Clint Eastwood. It also has Donald Sutherland in a hilarious role as this proto-hippie that is responsible for the army depot, and he's just oh, I love that guy. This is such a good movie. If you haven't seen Killer's Heroes, even if you're not really that much into war movies, maybe this is a good entry for you because it's as much a comedy and heist movie and shenanigans movie as it is a war movie. But when you do get action scenes, they're some of the best executed war scenes I've ever seen. The model work is amazing. The actual, not really model, just explosions and design of the vehicles, all of it works really well. It's just a very, very good movie. A movie that may not be good enough to really be included as one of my recommendations, but I'll do it anyway because it doesn't have enough 80s schlock on it. Savage Streets. Savage Streets is a mid-80s Linda Blair revenge film. It is in the category of lady revenge, though a bit different. It's not a I spit on your grave type of movie, but it does have a similar structure in that a woman uses traps and makeshift weapons and a crossbow to avenge her friend. And yeah, it's Linda Blair, and also you get to see Linda Blair's apparently humongous boobs. So if that sounds enticing to you, maybe watch this. I honestly have so many more movies I could recommend here, but I'll skip some of the lesser recommendations because this is getting too long already. So I want to skip to some of the ones I really enjoyed this year. 12 Angry Men. And it's the original from the late 50s. 12 Angry Men is a spectacular movie. It is a court drama. It's taking place in one room, and that's a jury that's about to decide the fate of a young man. And although it's almost 70 years old at this point, it is still relevant. It has a lot of political commentary, a lot of ideas, a lot of social problems that it's discussing that are still relevant to this day. You don't even need to see the remake to see a more relevant movie. This movie is relevant, it's very well made, and despite taking place in only this room, with only 12 angry men discussing the fate of this man, discussing crime, discussing proof, debating what is guilt and what is reasonable doubt, and all these things. It's great. It might sound boring, but it really isn't. It's amazing. It's so good. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, do watch it. The final one I'll mention, and I'll throw up some of the honorable mentions here just in text, but the final one I will mention is Gran Torino. Yes, I watched several Clint Eastwood movies this year, and yes, they are good. Clint Eastwood is a good director and actor, and maybe he is not the best person. Maybe he has done things in his life that you should not applaud. Maybe he has had opinions that you should not applaud, but that doesn't mean you can't enjoy the movies, especially a movie like Gran Torino. Of course, it is a movie that does come across as a way for Clint Eastwood to get away with saying as many racial slurs as possible, but it's not a bad movie. It's actually a really good movie. It's a really good movie about this racist who lives in a bad neighborhood and meets a family and realizes maybe they're not so bad and maybe I am a bit of a bad person. Of course, a lot of other things happen. It's not just a feel-good movie. It definitely isn't a feel-good movie. It's a really good movie, and if you can stomach all the racism in it, because of course the racism is not there to be racist, it's there to depict a racist person in a situation where you might understand his racism, might even sympathize with it to some extent. Though of course not so much the racism, but sympathize with the person who is just a miserable old bastard. It's interesting in that sense. It's always interesting to see these troubled heroes or anti-heroes, and this is definitely an anti-hero. I don't think you can come much closer to being an anti-hero than Clint Eastwood and Gran Torino. I know that's a lie. I mean, he's an anti-hero because he's deeply racist and flawed. There are anti-heroes who are murderous bastards. He's not one of them, so he's not the worst anti-hero or the most problematic anti-hero you have, but he's a really good anti-hero in this film. I don't know if I spoiled the movie for you by saying these things about it, but I definitely enjoyed it. So, those were all the good films I watched. I also want to talk about some of the awful movies I watched, some of the movies I really want to warn you against. I watched the remake of Roadhouse. The acting is some of the worst acting I want to say that I've ever seen. I don't think that's true. Jake Gyllenhaal is tolerable in it. McGregor is not. McGregor ruins this movie single-handedly. Even if everybody else gave a good performance in this movie, McGregor's performance alone would ruin it. But nobody really gives a good performance in this movie. There's so many frustrating, poorly written characters. The dialogue is awful. The bar itself is more boring. The action is not that good. There are some decent scenes, but they have enhanced it with CGI in a way that honestly made them much less intriguing for me to see. Of course, some of them are not as enhanced and they are better, but no, there's so many bad decisions in this movie, and I hated it. I really hated it. And another movie I really hated is Tank Girl. This is a very stupid, quirky, mid-90s post-apocalypse flick with cool people doing cool things with stupid, annoying characters doing stupid, annoying gags, and supposedly still being sympathetic and people you really care about. Or everybody's awful in this movie. It's horrible. The writing is awful. It very much feels like a bad Rodriguez movie, even though it isn't a Rodriguez movie, but it's just all the worst from the 90s in this movie. One thing I will say, it's not completely horrible because it has some good action scenes. Some of the effects in it are actually quite good. So, well, it is unredeemable, but it's not the worst I've seen. But something that might be the worst I've seen is the Jesus Rolls. This is an absolutely awful Big Lebowski ripoff that we didn't need. There is nothing positive to say about this movie. I hated this from the first 5 minutes and all the way until the end, without a break. There was not a single moment in this movie that I just low-key liked, or that made me smile, or that made me get even close to a laugh. It is awful. The Sisterhood of the Night. It is an awful mockumentary that is so poorly written, so horribly executed, with so blank characters, and no redeeming qualities. It has the worst exposition dialogue that, of course, it uses this mockumentary style to create exposition dialogue, but it's just not done in a way where it's believable, where it feels natural. This movie did my head in. I don't watch it. And it's one of those movies that actually has quite high ratings, and I can't understand why it is awful. Another movie that I think has a bit of a following, maybe even cult following at this point, is Euro Trip. It is a really bad comedy. It didn't have a single moment or joke that I liked. It's just a bunch of stereotypes. It's from that early 2000s period where stereotypes themselves were funny. You didn't need to do anything with them, where people could just laugh at things being different, at people being different, at people being gay, at people being fat, at people being horny, at people having large breasts, at an ass being exposed, a guy being fucked by a dominatrix. The scenes are not funny. The joke is just that the scene happens. There are no jokes in this movie. It's just bad. It's really, 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 really bad. And I don't understand why people like this. Maybe they just like that there was a time where these things were funny on their own. No, you need jokes. You need jokes to make this funny. You need jokes to make a gay guy funny. You need jokes to make someone being fucked up by a dominatrix funny. You can't just have the scene be there and be funny on its own. You need to do something with it, and this movie doesn't. So I mentioned Suburban Sasquatch earlier. I also watched The Happening. This is one of those movies that people also hate watch. One of those movies that is supposedly so bad it's good. I think it's just bad. I did not have a good time watching it. I hated it. Yes, it's a bad movie, but it's not a fun bad movie. I mean, it's so stupid that the idea that this was written is funny, but it's torturous to sit through. Of course, I don't want to discourage you from seeing it yourself, because this is one of those you might want to pick up and watch just to know what a bad movie is, because this is an archetype of a horrible movie. Another film I want to emphasize is Begotten. I found Begotten on a list of the most disturbing movies of all time, and it's not. It's just a boring black and white art house movie that has a few disturbing scenes, no dialogue, nothing is really happening in it, and it's just boring as all hell. It's not disturbing unless you find wasting your time to be disturbing. Then there's the Jim Jarmusch movie Coffee and Cigarettes from 2003. This is just a very annoying and pretentious Jim Jarmusch film that comes off as Jim Jarmusch just wanting to find a reason to spend time with all the people he likes. So he created a movie where he just gets to hang around people he likes. And most of the conversations are boring, petty, first world problems or nothing scenarios. With one exception, and that actually harkens back to the 24-hour party people. The segment with that guy is actually quite good. So it's not completely redeemable. It has one or two good segments, but that's it. The rest is awful. Another supposed classic that I hated is The Big Blue. It is just way too long. The acting is really bad. The writing is really bad, and there are no redeeming qualities, as I said with so many of these films. So let's move on. The Green Inferno is a movie I was curious about. It's definitely a very, very, very bad cannibal movie made by the Bear Jew. It has a lot of nasty gore, which, of course, if you're a gore pervert, you might think that's enough for you. But I don't think it will be, because the writing, the characters, the decisions, just everything else about this movie sucks. It's a really bad movie. It's awful. Even if the gore is good, the rest isn't. I do get tired from talking about all these bad movies, but a film that I didn't like, that had been recommended to me as very, very grim, disgusting, great Western was Brimstone. I think Brimstone is just, yeah, it's grim, but it's also very, very boring. Very little happened in this movie, and yes, of course, the abuse of women in this film is grisly, it's scary, it's horrifying. In theory, it's just boring in this movie, and it's a very nasty movie to watch because of the treatment of women in it, but not nasty in a way that's good, or insightful, or deep felt. It's just not good. It's not a good movie. It's a waste of time. A film that I had high hopes for, just because The Mummy was my favorite movie growing up, was The Whale. It's ambitious, but ambitious in a very boring way. There's no charm and it's very pretentious. I don't have much to say about it, but as I wrote in my Letterboxd, it's leaving Las Vegas, but with obesity. Another quick movie another quick mention is Torso. It's just a boring giallo horror flick. You don't really need to watch it. It's not good giallo. You can do something else instead of that. And mentioning Brendan Fraser, I watched George of the Jungle. This is as 90s as it gets. It is awful. It is horrible. All the visual gags, all the jokes, all the decisions, all the characters. Again, no redeeming quality. It is abysmal. Maybe you would love it if you're a 3-year-old kid, but that's about it. Another movie you might love as a 3-year-old kid is The Wedding Singer. I don't really like Adam Sandler, but this is one of those movies where people said, oh, even if you're not a fan of Adam Sandler, you might like The Wedding Singer. It's a good movie. No, it's not. I don't think it is. I still think that all the jokes are bad. It has no redeeming qualities. Adam Sandler is a very, very bad, poorly acted, very obnoxious character in the movie. Everything about this movie really, really sucks. Everything except for that one iconic line in the movie that honestly is on my mind more than it should be. I might get flack for saying it, but even if you recommended this as a non-Adam Sandler fan, don't really expect liking it. You probably won't. There are other movies I could mention as movies I really didn't like, but they're all low budget indie movies or movies that are just, you probably wouldn't watch them anyway. So I just wanted to give my thoughts about some of the more well-known movies that you might stumble across. Okay, that was a lot of films. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you can maybe enjoy your time with some of these films I recommended. I know a lot of these movies will not be for you. Some of them are very subjective for me, that I sometimes love movies that other people hate. Some of these are just right up my alley for one reason or another. But I do hope to give you at least some joy if you do manage to watch some of these videos and enjoy them yourself. I really like the idea of just people watching good movies. I am a simple man with simple pleasures. I just want people to watch good movies. Is it too much to ask? Yes, because they're subjective. It's my idea of what a good movie is, so it is maybe too much to ask. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you will, well, find some inspiration. And I hope you will have a good year. I hope 2025 will be great for you and will be great for everyone. And that our world will become a better place. And that we will have triple rainbows everywhere. And that pigs will learn to fly. Bye.